Good morning, everybody. I think we're on the way to potentially coming out of this, and hopefully Boris will tell us next week the road to recovery and when we can open. We've got a really interesting presentation today, which hopefully you'll find very useful, concentrating on the working from home and the delivery of virtual activities. Obviously, we will be moving to a place where there'll be a lot more people working from home, and there's been some interesting stats that have come out recently about people working from home and their mental health and also physical health as well. So that will be very interesting, and hopefully you'll gain a lot from that. We've also got Barry Horn from the Activity Alliance coming in to talk about the national survey that they've done, and obviously the effect of COVID on people with disabilities and long-term health conditions. So welcome to Barry, and thank you very much for joining us today. Then we will do a bit of an update on where we're at and what we're doing, and then we'll go over to questions at the end. So hope you're all well and fighting fit, and I'll pass you over to Ian.
Hello everybody. If we could have the first slide, please. Unfortunately, we still haven't got a panacea or a direct contact into Sage or Boris, so these are things that you will already have hopefully heard if you've been keeping track of what's happening. The great news that we've got over 15 million people now vaccinated, and that we're on to the next tranche of people. You begin to realise your age when you actually get the text that you are due to have your vaccine. So I'm due for mine on Thursday, which is great news that as a country we're moving forward fast with that, which might be the way that we're going to be able to live with this rather than eradicate it. I think that's the popular belief at the moment, and obviously the way the scientists are looking, and therefore some of these controls we're talking about today will last for the foreseeable future, if not forever. So I think it's right that we concentrate on these things and get them right for the future, and that we don't end up being locked down again. As you already know, UK trials, they've approved new drugs. I haven't practiced those words, so I'm not going to be like Boris. I'm going to say dexamethasone, and I'm not going to try the next drug. But there's some exciting trials that, again, will make it easier that we can live with this without the high death rate and pressure on the NHS. The R rate we know is coming down. That's not universal in all areas, but hopefully most areas now are down to that, which means we're on top of it. And hopefully next week, I'm sure we'll all be tuned to the television on the 22nd to watch what we hope might be a roadmap forward and a way out of where we're at. Everybody knows all about the quarantine hotels that have been prominent in the press, the rapid result lateral flow tests being available for employers with over 50 staff if they can't work from home. So that's something some of the bigger employers online might be looking at. Death rates now have quartered in the last week, and the case rate is dropping quite rapidly. So lots of positive news, clearly a very cautious approach that they're taking, and hopefully one that will see us being able to get some better news next week. Next slide, please. Headlines over the last few weeks continued. There's been some guidance and updates on the furlough scheme, so that if you've got people that are having to remain at home either shielding or have got responsibility for caring because of COVID, they now can be furloughed, whereas previously they couldn't. The sector continues to lobby government to try and get centres open. There's been quite a lot of high-profile people, although I think every industry is trying to put high-profile people on to try and argue their case, but at least our industry is trying. Sport England have started to distribute their £100 million recovery fund to leisure organisations, and hopefully we'll see some benefit from that. And some organisations have begun to receive payouts due to insurers. We know of at least one, if not more, that have been paid out or part paid out under the business interruption cover. And I press on all of you that if you've got business interruption cover and you haven't claimed yet, you look at that and you pressurise your insurers to look at it for you. Okay, next slide, please. So what next? As I said earlier, Boris is due to give an announcement next Monday. Hopefully that will give a roadmap. Scotland are giving some further updates today, mainly from what we've heard in the press. That's based on schools, but again, it might give some indications. Lockdown restrictions in Wales are due to be reviewed on the 19th, so later this week, and Northern Ireland is on the 18th. And in the Republic of Ireland, all four levels of control that they've got there are going to remain in place till at least the 5th of March. So we've got some indications that sometime this month we're likely to hear a bit more, and hopefully we can have a bigger picture or a better picture of how we might eventually be able to work towards reopening. And those considerations, as they've kept repeating, are going to be based on the death rate, pressure on the NHS, which gladly we see is reducing, and the vaccination programme working. Next slide, please. So one of the things I don't think is going to change, even after they announce reopening, due to the fact that we're going to have to learn to live with this rather than eradicate it, is that we see more people will be working from home ongoing through the pandemic. And therefore we do have to treat it seriously. While not all roles can effectively be carried out, all of you will have certain roles, finance, admin, sales, who might be suited to be able to work at home at least for some of the time, if not all. We've also seen an increase in instructors delivering online classes from home, and this may also continue. Employers still have a responsibility for the health and safety of their staff if they are working from home. Just because they are at home, you can't just assume that their workplace is adequate and that your requirement for them to provide a service for you is going to happen as smoothly as you think without your input. So next slide, please. As employers, you'll need to consider what activities staff will be doing and whether they can be done safely, be that an online class or sat at a desk looking into a PC screen. What controls you have in place, what staff will do if things go wrong, including a fire or accident at home, and how you keep in touch with staff who may feel isolated and stressed. And I'll come on to that in the next slide, because I think that is an increasingly growing area of concern, particularly if this goes on forever. And particularly at the moment, this lockdown seems more challenging for a lot of people mentally and stress-wise. Challenges include staff adjusting to new home working environment permanently or for longer periods of time for them to be able to stay motivated and focused. Team working relationships and communication, and we were talking about this earlier amongst ourselves, that we know of some people that furloughed all their managers but kept duty managers on through the first furlough, and when they came back, the duty managers were relating to the more senior manager in the organisation rather than their own GMs, which set up tensions and issues of duty managers who suddenly got the confidence to do more and were more up to date, being ahead of their managers, and we know that caused some issues. So I think there's lots of things you need to think about when you're looking at developing policies, etc., for how staff work at home and how you continue to communicate with them and monitor performance. Okay, next slide. So as an employer, employees, they must cooperate with you as employers. They must take care of any equipment you've provided and report defects, and they must follow any policies and procedures that you've put in place. So if you require them to get dressed properly, hopefully that's all the way down, not just from the top, and that working from home means no, still working in your PJs. So there are policies that you'll be putting in place. I'm sure you might have already done so, but if this is going to go on forever, you need to perhaps think about how those policies are applied. Next slide. One of the key areas is display screens, but it's wider than that from working from home, because you've got no control or limited control over the workspaces that they're using. We've got, which we will post out later in the week, a more encompassing self-assessment for staff to do at home. We know from reports we've seen from the likes of large solicitors, Kennedy's, that they have done some survey work and found lots more aches and pains being reported by younger members of staff rather than older ones from sat all the time at their desks. Just a trip from their bed to their desk means their lack of physical activity, they're not getting routine exercise, and therefore they're beginning to suffer pain and problems of working in inappropriate surroundings. I know, for instance, myself, from years of working off a laptop, particularly out at site when we're doing audits, I suffered for a long time with neck and shoulder pains. However, during this lockdown, when we've been working, I finally set my desk up correctly, and surprise, surprise, many of those aches and pains have gone. So it does show that some small adaptations and taking seriously the self-assessment process and making sure staff have got the right space, the right desk, the right adjustments to have their laptops or computers is going to be a long-term benefit for them. And for you to organise how you're going to communicate with them and get those assessments done. Doesn't mean you have to go to their homes. You do it via self-assessment tools, and hopefully cover things off. Next slide, please. So you need to consult with your staff, get them to do the checklists, provide supply equipment where necessary, and I think this will be a big theme that will come about. If you're expecting somebody to work from home permanently and they're saying that their desk or chairs aren't adequate, you might well have to think about how you support them long term, particularly if they aren't coming back into the office space they originally occupied. Whether you're providing consumables to support them, their work from home, and give guidance and training on reducing the risks of display screens while at home. Next slide, please, Jill. So you need to think about within those self-assessments, the basics that you do already, the things you do around your own office. Are there any risks that might enhance or lead to greater risk of accidents while in the workplace? Okay, that's quite straightforward. We need to move on. Next slide, please. So feelings of stress and mental health, I think, are growing issues, particularly with this second lockdown. And I think we need to be thinking about how you address social isolation and empower staff to feel involved. And even if staff up to this point haven't been involved, feel free to encourage them back in to join in whatever you've got in to try and create that connectivity. Sometimes staff who've perhaps isolated themselves previously, now is the time to reach out for them and trying to get them to rejoin in regular communications and maybe social things that you're doing online to keep connected with your staff. Make sure you're properly managing your team. Just because they're working from home doesn't mean they need a tap on the shoulder or a conversation just to see how they're getting on and to see how the workload is being panned out and whether they're taking the regular exercise they need to keep both mental and physical health in a reasonable state. Next slide, please. So, considerations. Make sure you develop that home working policy if you are going to be expecting staff to continue to work from home. As I said earlier, I think for many of us, keeping the numbers of people down in small offices is going to be a thing of the future. Whereas you will have times when you'll need everybody in for team gets-togethers. We will still need to live with rather than without COVID, and even with vaccinations people will still catch it and will still pass it on, and we don't want the unvaccinated or the people who are more at risk to end up back in hospital and pressures mounting again. So I'm sure for all of us it will be worth developing home working policies. There are insurance implications for you as an organisation which you need to check with your insurers, the same as employees should be checking that there are no issues with them working from home, with their mortgage providers and landlords. And for some of them there might be benefits. I think some of us saw during lockdown 1, some home insurers gave rebates because the number of break-ins to houses dropped because people were at home. So there might be some benefits for people. The need for flexibility during lockdown, caring responsibilities, homeschooling, which we hope will come to an end soon for all of those of you who are still having to homeschool. Provision of advice on eyesight testing that you would do normally, but just because people are working from home, you shouldn't be forgetting that. Seek help and advice if required, and regularly reviewing those self-assessment check sheets to make sure your people who are required to work from home, things aren't changing, and that they're staying within their original assessment of where they were. So other considerations, and next slide, sorry, Jill. So we now look at some of the more active working from home things, which is delivering activities from home. Online virtual classes and physical activities have become more common, particularly with Joe Wicks leading the way. I'm sure he didn't do risk assessments though on the impact of the BBC producing them, but I think we do, particularly where we are charging people to join online classes. So we still have a duty of care, not only towards the participants, but also towards your coaches and instructors. And that means asking those individuals to carry out some kind of self-assessment themselves when they are delivering the courses from home, and also for those taking part. So next slide, please, Jill. Things that they might need to consider is the suitability of the environment, the space. Have they got enough room to carry out the type of activities you'll be wanting them to do? At least 3 square meters of space probably, where they're not going to bump into tables, or if they've got a fire on, they're not going to set fire to the clothes they're using. If they've got pets, are they going to come in and result in the person tripping up? Check your instructors and your own insurance. I know some insurers are putting stipulations on the number of people that can be taught online, certainly through when you're doing it through the likes of Zoom or Teams and actually interacting with your clients. That there are some limitations being placed on the numbers they think they can actively engage with. So need to check the qualifications that people do in the classes, making sure participants perhaps are given a disclaimer or asked to sign some form of online disclaimer before they first enroll in any of these courses. And there are safeguarding issues. Are you going to allow young people under 18 to join classes if they haven't got an adult within the class environment at home as well? And think about incidents and emergency arrangements. Do you have the addresses of the people that are taking part? So if you see one of them keel over during a class, are you able to call the emergency services to go to their help? And there's been quite a lot of helpful information published by CIMSPA, and also they link to EDM, who have also produced lots of backup material to help you produce those risk assessments and consider the issues that you're going to be doing. Next slide, please. And here are some of the links that you're doing that are available to you. We do know of one organisation that has already had an accident with online, and we don't know quite where that's going at the moment, but we do know that these things do happen. Okay. Next slide, please. I think these will come out, all these issues will come out with the slides when all the links when they're sent out. So I think, is this me or is this Caroline? I think this is me. We are in the process of, and you need to think about, hopefully after the 22nd, really ramping up your reopening and recovery plans. Revisit your past clinics. Ensure your mobilisation plans are up to date, your pandemic management plans are up to date, and your risk assessments, when we get the announcements, are adjusted accordingly, so that once you are back and ready to go, you don't have any of the paperwork issues to worry about, and you've got a clear line to be able to train staff in any new procedures, to be able to get yourselves back up and running as effectively as you can. Okay, next slide. And now I'd like to be able to introduce Barry Horn, Chief Executive of the Activity Alliance. They've just undertaken a large survey of annual disability and activity research. And it's great to have Barry on the line to be able to talk about that and see how we can help in our roles in assisting within this very important area. So Barry, hi. I don't know whether you've got your camera on or whether you can leave your camera off, but thank you for coming online with us. Are you there, Barry?
I am, yes, and I hope the camera's on. I can see it
Oh, right.
on screen.
There you go. There you are. Yeah, most people will be able to see you in the bottom corner, so it's great to welcome you. Barry, your organisation recently published its findings from its survey into physical activity levels amongst people with disabilities, and particularly the effects of COVID. Can you tell us a bit about this and the headline findings that you got from it?
Yeah, sure. It is the second of our annual surveys, and significant because obviously this one took place within the COVID period, and it's thrown up some quite worrying facts, as people might expect. I think one of the things I want to reinforce, though, is the purpose of the survey is to complement the other data that's around, including Active Lives from Sport England, and it's trying to get a better understanding of the issues that sit behind the numbers. And what we were finding previously was that a lot of the concerns and barriers that disabled people in particular were beginning to be addressed. And we were definitely seeing progress both in absolute numbers and in how disabled people felt about being active. Significant improvement over the last 3 years. But the main story from this survey is that quite clearly COVID set us back significantly. And I think there are a couple of points to emphasise. One is it set us back because disabled people have been disproportionately affected by COVID. Very directly. The number of disabled people, and that includes all impairments, it includes long-term health conditions. The proportion of the people who tragically have died during COVID shows that 70% of those fall into this category of disabled people. So people have been really hit hard. And what our survey also shows is that activity levels have fallen backwards. New and challenging barriers have been added to those that were there before. And overall, what we're saying as a result of this survey is that it's doubly important that as we return to activity, and in the way you've been describing, that we very proactively plan for disabled people's inclusion.
I mean, for those who haven't seen it yet, I've had the benefit of being able to look a little bit at the survey. The link to that survey will come out with the slides, although the link is on the bottom there. So if any of you want to look before that, you can pick it up. The survey clearly showed a greater fear of contracting the virus amongst those people surveyed than the general population. What more do you think we can do as an industry that can address these fears?
Yeah, I mean, for sure that fear of contraction of the virus, it drives a lot of people's behaviours. 35%, it was the second biggest reason that disabled people gave for being cautious about returning to activity. But actually it was almost a quarter of non-disabled people who gave the same reasons. So it is particularly important that we think, as we did between last July and September as a sector, about what reassurance we can give people about the safety of returning to, particularly to indoor settings and particularly where people are using equipment. So it is important for disabled people, but I think it's also part of the messaging that all people need to hear. Actually, the bigger reason that was specific to disabled people was self-isolating, which we know was a big driver for people's choices and what they were able to do and not able to do. And obviously, as you've been describing, Ian, as we're returning to perhaps an environment where more people have protection, hopefully that fear will reduce as well. I would just add that it's as much about how we embed messaging about equipment and environments being safe, that we put that in the context of a very positive and proactive approach to engaging people to come back in to being active, and that we make sure that that's done in a way that resonates for disabled people as well. as the wider population.
Yeah, I think from what you're saying though, if we get it right for everybody and try and reduce those fears, it will impact as well positively on the number feeling able to come back in. So this isn't just about focusing on one group. We get it right for one, as we do with many things. We get it right for a much wider group of people.
Absolutely right.
Given the current economic difficulties all leisure operators are facing at the moment, particularly where local authorities set the pricing and often give access free or at heavily subsidised rates, what can be done to help incentivise operators to genuinely target and encourage the disability market? And is there anything you or Sports England can do to put pressure on local authorities to look at different ways they let their contracts to encourage that?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot in that question, and I mean, in a sense, we might need to just sort of unpack a bit about, what the ideal answer to that might be. I mean, I would say two things, and then it'd be interesting to see what other people think and feel. But what I would say is that there is the principal objective is to look at how disabled people right across a broad range of impairments. We might be talking about deaf people, we might be talking about people with mental illness, we might be talking about people returning from a major operation or recovering from stroke or cancer. So it's 1 in 5 of the population, and they're not served typically by dedicated disability sessions. They're not necessarily going to be drawn into bespoke sessions, but some of those might happen. Some of those might be subsidised, and it might help some operators to make use of capacity by running subsidised sessions. But I think the big point for me would be to say, what are we able to do in a context where we have a major public health challenge to show that this sector can respond positively to that by specifically prioritising and enabling disabled people and people with long-term health conditions to get the benefits of being active. I don't think there'll be anyone on this session that doesn't believe passionately that activity is good for you. I hope as people look more into the survey results, they'll see the extent to which disabled people need that opportunity perhaps more than most. And therefore my hope is that both policy, practice and the approach of Sports England and government is there to advocate that. So I'm interested in what change of guidance you might think would help to give local authorities, apart from, I hope, advocating more activity for disabled people.
I think it comes from a personal perspective that very often they're not incentivized to try and grow and make sure the numbers of people with disabilities is representative of the community. And I think it would be much better to be a carrot than a stick, to say you aren't getting these people in, or your facilities aren't adapted to IFI, therefore we're going to financially be punitive towards you, rather than if you achieve these increasing goals, then there will be a carrot, and it will be therefore in their benefit to chase memberships amongst the whole community far more than just the community of the people they think they can pay, because very often people see disability as being financially impoverished as well. Now I know lots of them are, but it's not exclusively that.
For sure, and I for me the ultimate measure would be how accurately does your participation reflect the local community, in every sense, and that's what we mean by inclusion, and that would be the best measure, as I think you're saying, Ian.
Yeah. I know from undertaking Inclusive Fitness Initiative assessments, which is obviously part of yourselves, that very often it's not the physical arrangements which put people off using the facilities, but it's our own actions and thought processes which disable people. Are there any tips you could give to help operators look at access in a more enabling and open manner to see what's possible as opposed to not possible?
I mean, I think this is a key question, and we've always been positive about looking at the context of an offer, and IFI and Quest have got the right kind of guidance about things that people need to do to get it to get their offer right. But it's as much about thinking about in a sense, in very simple terms, the customer in front of you, or the potential customer who's not yet in front of you. And really what we're looking for is to say, well, how will we turn towards an approach that proactively thinks about engaging new participants? We need to have the confidence that all of the conditions will be in place for that to be successful when people arrive, but it's as much about using really basic principles. All of our research, and it's all available on the same website as this annual report, but all of our research over the years has been trying to understand what it is that, if we get it right, will work in terms of supporting disabled people's activity. And we've, one of the things we've produced, are 10 really simple principles that underpin a lot of the advocacy that we share, which go to the heart of really just good customer service, I would suggest. Think about how you engage your audience, what kind of communication mechanisms are out there. This survey is reinforcing something that we knew, but it's even stronger now, which is that health professionals and local communities are more likely to be influential of disabled people's choices about becoming active. So think about how we reach out. Think about where the offer is provided. I know there'll be people who are connected to specific facilities, leisure centres and the like, but part of that mixed offer that we're moving into, I think, will require us to use not just support for people at home, but other community-based facilities in a more imaginative and creative way, so more activities taking place. So it's thinking about the messaging, thinking about the range of flexible opportunities, but 5 out of the 10 principles are actually focused at point of delivery, and they're really not rocket science. And I don't want to sort of patronise in a sense, because people will know that if you ask people what it is they might need to make their opportunity to be active successful, typically they'll tell you. So there's a lot in there about just establishing what requirements people have. And there's a great stat within this survey that I'd missed the first time, but when I was looking at it again for this, 4 out of 5 disabled people, almost identical to non-disabled people, were saying, both within the COVID context and before it, that their experience with the activity provider was a positive one. That when people get into this context, it's working for a majority, and it's working as well for most disabled people as it is for non-disabled people. So there's a lot that we're getting right. So it's not about saying like everybody's got to radically change what they do, but I just think we need more people doing that right stuff, and we need it to be the norm rather than the exception.
I mean, I think it was great at the beginning. You said up until this year there was positive signs of improvement, but obviously the pandemic has had a more disproportionate impact. While that confidence to come back grows, do you think the online offering is a potential way that we could provide greater opportunities for people that feel isolated and not able to come back into indoor environments yet?
For sure. And, I do think there's a number of positives that we have to take, from any challenging situation, but it's about what kind of mixed economy will we have going forward? And I, there's no doubt that accessing good quality information about how to be active at home or in your garden or in a non-structured setting is going to be more and more important. And a lot of that, and we've been with Sport England looking to promote it, a lot of that might work for specific groups of disabled people. There's some great seated yoga out there that Wheel Power in particular have promoted, including for wheelchair users. But most of us can benefit from thinking about seated yoga. When we're sitting at our desk, there's some of the simple elements of that work for us. That might be part of, as well as your workstation here. It might just get better for you. So I think, that online offer is a great addition. But I think the biggest bit is about the read across. I find myself thinking a bit about almost reversing the message that maybe we were putting out a little while ago that was encouraging people who might want to row on open water to first perhaps row in a gym or get used to a rowing machine and then take that out to the outdoors. Well, I actually think that one of the things we might want to do here, because outdoor activity looks like it might well be alongside virtual activity, the thing that gets pushed hardest as we come out of lockdown, that we then start thinking about, well, what can we do to connect to that audience that gives them the confidence to bring that energy indoors and into facilities that you might be operating in. So it's going to be a richer, I would suggest, market, but people need to think quite creatively about how to engage someone who might have got the confidence to go out and be active, to feel confident enough to build on that by coming into a facility to be active as well, whether it's from outdoors or from being active on a virtual setting at home.
I think that's some really good points. Thank you for all of that, Barry. Jill, I don't know, I've seen quite a lot of things coming in on the chat. I don't know whether there are any other questions from external people we want to pose to Barry. You're muted, Jill, if you're talking back to me.
Yeah, we've had a couple of questions in, Ian, for Barry in particular, and maybe some more might come in. And there are some, Ian, if you'd like to just read the chat whilst I
don't know where it started. So.
Okay, yeah, it's quite a way up. There is some observations which you might want to pick up. But Barry, one question that has come in. I don't know if you've seen the media today, but the BBC are reporting that 60% of people who have died from COVID are disabled. Would you agree with that figure? And have they talked to you or any of your colleagues to how they're actually defining disabled in those figures?
Jill, yeah, and I mentioned that in what I was saying about why it's particularly important that we prioritise the group in society which are both the least active before COVID. We're talking about the group that started, in a sense, from the lowest base in terms of activity levels, but also who've been impacted most by COVID. And it really helps us, and I'm glad you asked it in that way, to step into that question about, well, who do we mean? Because people might say, well, surely it's actually older people who've been disproportionately affected, or surely it's people with complex health needs. Well, the important point when we talk about 1 in 5 of the population are disabled people is that it's, we haven't got time for it, but it's the social model of disability. It's not their condition, their sight loss, their hearing impairment, their mental illness, their recovery from or experience of a long-term health condition that disables them. It's our inability to make things work for them that leads us to define that whole group as disabled people. Now, not everybody might easily get that proposition, but the point being that it shouldn't surprise us that it's over 60%, and that figure has been around and is in our survey report for a while. And I haven't seen it today, but I'm glad the BBC are covering it. What matters is what we do about that. Does that lead us to say, well, why don't we think about future-proofing the ability of that group of people to be less exposed to future risks of pandemics? Why don't we think about what we can do to build a level of fitness and well-being that will, if you like, both protect individuals but also help our long-term public health objectives? So, yeah, it is around 2/3 of the people who died during COVID who can properly be defined as disabled people. And it is the case, therefore, that adds, not only because of the extra challenges about accessing activity that this survey shows us, but hopefully it gives us a different sense of priority for how we respond to that.
I mean, on the back of that, Barry, there's another question come into the chat, and it's from Alison Davison. So, given that broad definition, Barry, are you able to clarify in terms of Sport England's exemptions for disabled to continue activity during lockdown? Who is in that category, and what definitions has been used?
Yeah, so my hope is that it would include all of that group of people, but what you have to get into is the next layer of technical definition. And part of what Sport England, partly, for example, for their Active Lives survey, add to that mix is whether that condition impacts on their ability to be active. I don't think that would take many of the people out of that 1 in 5 of the population out of that definition, and therefore the vast majority, I would suggest, should benefit from that exemption. But when you look at those numbers, and this is why I think people need to just think a bit more differently. Ian and I had a brief conversation earlier about this sometimes preconception that it might be wheelchair users we're talking about, who are an important group that represent less than 8% of disabled people. Older people represent by far the biggest demographic group amongst that definition of disabled people. So there is a question about the extent to which some of the activities that are coming through of all types for older people, A, are working, and B, can secure some of that exemption requirement, which I hope, Jill, I'm sure like you, is a short-term thing. A good question to ask, but my hope is that it's a time-limited question that won't have a great relevance in 6 months' time.
So can I just chip it back? Just similarly, do you see there being an increase in the number of people that will be classified with a disability due to long COVID? I know as an industry we're trying to provide, lots of our clients are trying to provide some help and support for that, but do you see that as another challenge that will confront us?
I do. I mean, it's interesting though that I don't think we yet know the characteristics of long COVID, but it's clearly going to be a condition that makes it harder or limits or needs particular support for people to be active. So it is an addition. It's a long-term health condition that needs attention, and so yes, that's going to add to the numbers. But I don't want to overplay this, because I think there's a relevance here for everyone. There's big numbers of people who had COVID, some of whom didn't have tremendous symptoms, but I had it in the first 2 weeks of the year, and it felt awful at the time. but it's now mid-February, and I've only yet been on one bike ride. And so there is also, as well as the defined long COVID, there's also a challenge for all of us here to support people back into activity, some of whom are not able to just quickly jump back on their bike or shoot down the gym or have a game of tennis. So I think there's a sector response that we need to have that thinks about, that really thinks about the after effects of the pandemic, as well as the other elements of recovery.
Okay. Thanks for that, Barry. At the moment, that's all the questions that have come in, but we'll move on with the presentation, and you can just stay with us because I'm sure there may be some other questions.
But that's been brilliant. I mean, let's hope we return to the great news that it had been improving and we get back to that, but which is really encouraging. But it's obviously this is the extra bit on top, isn't it, that now needs to be addressed. So
absolutely.
Thank you, Barry.
Okay, so
Thanks a lot.
I think it's the last slide, isn't it, Jill?
Yeah.
Which is...
So Caroline, Caroline, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you ever so much, Barry, and thank you also for your support that you give us at Right Directions with the IFI accreditation, obviously now known as part of Quest and standalone. So if anybody out there is interested in considering doing the accreditation, it's not like it used to be, is it, Barry? It's not all just about bits of kit in your gym. It's now about staff involvement and comms and marketing and all sorts of other aspects of encouraging people to get active, and also not just physically disabled now, obviously with medical conditions and other disabilities as well. So thank you, Barry, really appreciate that. Just a few updates from us. Please keep an eye on the LinkedIn and social media, Facebook and Twitter panels for information briefs that come out. Just so you know, we aren't sending them out every single week. We don't want you to read the same old thing every single day, every single week. So we are only sending out briefs if there is new information for you. So please keep an eye on our social media. And also, if you do need any support, reopening or any advice on anything you're doing, please, as you know, we're still here to give us a shout. We're really chuffed with the amount of people who've been asking for support and advice over the last year. So keep it coming. That's what we're here for. We're all in this together. We do have another clinic coming up for any Right Directions clients. That next one is on the 23rd of February. So for those of you who we know, a lot of people in the chat are Right Directions clients, please get in touch to join on to that one. And also we've now launched quite a lot of our on-demand training. So again, if you are clients, there are some free sessions for you, for your staff. Again, get in contact with us and we will organise those. We have also, for those of you who use StaffMIS as part of Right Directions, we now have a facility matrix as part of that, which is where you can log all of your statutory compliance declaration and any other things that you want to put in there that have expiry dates or need regular checks. Those can now be added on to StaffMIS. So if you do have StaffMIS, please again get in touch with us. And as we've said before, we will only be updating all of our procedures for you as and when there are significant changes in legislation or best practice. So if those of you who are thinking, why I haven't had the updates, that's why we're keeping them to the minimum at the moment for you all. Next slide, please, Jill. For those of you who are part of Quest, who have withdrawn or sitting at the moment in limbo, we are obviously putting everybody back into Quest as soon as people are ready. We will be in touch with you if your assessments were due in 2020 to think about getting them back in in 2021. For those of you who don't know, we have a new Prime scheme, which is about, sorry, just reading the chat. New Quest Prime scheme, which is linked to being actively ready, and you get a lovely logo on your system for you get this lovely Actively Ready logo that can go on your front doors. So please get in touch with us. The modules are all related to COVID security and making sure you're ready to reopen. So get in touch with us if you're interested in Quest or want confirmation of when assessments are or what you can and can't do if you were in Quest before. Next slide, please, Jill. During the last year, we have designed and written and launched some fantastic training sessions. For those of you who are Right Directions clients, as I said earlier, we've offered you some free courses, so please get in touch. For those of you who are not, as you can see, we've kept them as cheap as chips, so that you can get your staff onto the courses as quick as possible. And don't forget, during furlough, people can do training for you. You don't have to take them off of furlough. They can do it whilst they're being paid by the government. Next slide, please, Jill. For information, just to let you know, ActiveNet is happening online this year for the first time. So please get in touch with LeisureNet, David Monkhouse or Mike Hill if you're interested in joining ActiveNet online. I think there are still some spaces left, not many, but there are a few spaces left. So please sign up if you're interested in some networking and another opportunity to talk to people. Next slide, please, Joe. Our next clinic is going to be on the 16th of March at 10:30. However, if there are significant announcements by the government before then, obviously we will go back to doing clinics more regularly if needs be. But at the moment, our next one is booked in for the 16th of March for your diaries. We've also got 2 guest speakers who are operators within the industry, so we're not going to let you know who they are yet. But please obviously sign up for the next clinic as soon as you see there's a link. And of course, we're still here. I'm sorry I'm rambling very quickly. It's because we're running out of time and we still got some time for some questions. So we're still here to support. Jill, next slide, please. I've got one more thing before we go over to questions. I'm sure you saw the photograph of the cat on one of the slides. Maybe worth considering what your Zoom and your Teams etiquette is and what you expect staff to do, how you expect them to behave, whether you need them to mute or cameras or backdrops or whatever it happens to be. You really don't want any of your staff being cats or dogs or dragons or whatever it happens to be and not being able to get out of it. So when we were talking about the working from home earlier, I know it was very much about health and safety, but we may need to look at what your etiquette systems are in place. And one other thing that we've had a couple of comments that people don't like seeing the participants waiting in the lobby coming up on the screen. If you go to the top of your bar, you can either go on the chat or next to the chat, there's a picture of 2 little people. If you click on that and see the participants, then you won't see it coming up on the screen, and then you can click back to chat at any time if you find those symbols coming up on the system to be a pain in the bum. I'm going to hand over to Jill for questions. Jill, has there been any more questions come in?
Yeah, we've got a few. We've got a few for Ian. Ian, are you there?
No, I've gone.
Have you? That's because you've seen the questions, isn't it?
I've been trying to turn my face into a cat.
Ian, I think you'd be more like a dog than a cat. Ian, there's a couple of questions here which I think are maybe more HR, and I don't know if you can answer. But if you can't, what we'll do is we'll talk to Sian, who's our HR expert, and come back to those people. So the first one is, can we claim free COVID lateral flow tests for employees who are working from home?
I don't know about that one, and also I'm not sure the point of that. If they are working from home, if they're coming in and mixing with you afterwards, I can't really see the point in that. But I think the issue we were saying, it's for employers with over 50 staff that are going to be able to get those in place. I don't know whether it's defined working from home as opposed to working in the workplace.
Okay, what we'll do, I think that came in from Donna. Donna, what we'll do is we'll talk to Sian, one of our team members who's our HR expert, and we'll come back to you. We'll email you that response later on, either today or tomorrow. there's a question around equipment here, Ian. Would we need to consider or discuss the equipment being used at home for classes? And I'm assuming classes with fitness classes. I mean, I know we had a discussion about this in the week, and I know that you're working on the risk assessment for online classes.
I think where you're expecting your clients to use equipment, and even your own instructors to use equipment, if they're at home, you do need to include that within your risk assessment and think about what is going to be used and how it's going to be deployed. Clearly, if it's going to end up as a trip hazard for them in a confined space, then you might want to think, as Joe Wicks did most of his exercise, using either things in the house or just an empty space. It does add another layer of complication, which you should think about within the risk assessment.
Okay, and taking that next step, Ian. Sorry, Caroline.
Can I just add very quickly on the lateral testing? There is a government website called National Workplace Testing where you can go in. If you employ more than 50 people, you can put in your company details. I haven't put in my company details, so I don't know if I can get tests for free. I don't employ over 50 people, so I probably wouldn't get to the next stage. But there is a website where you can put all the information in, and hopefully it will tell you whether or not you get them for free or not.
Thank you for that, Caroline. Ian, just going back to the classes. There's a question around instructors. So if instructors are self-employed, is there a health and safety responsibility as well as an insurance responsibility?
I think if they are providing classes for you, you have to think through the mechanisms of who is taking responsibility for that. And as a responsible employer, I think you should be treating both in a similar way in terms of them making sure their workspace is safe, and also they can put the controls in place that you need to make sure you are safe with your members, and that you don't get claims coming back at you because your self-employed instructor hasn't given the advice at the beginning of the class or done any pre-assessment with people coming onto online classes for the first time, and they don't know the physical state they're in, and advise them that if they feel they're being pushed too hard, they should listen to their own bodies rather than put themselves at risk. So yeah, I don't think you should really, in terms of risk assessment, be treating one any differently from the other in the way you review your approach.
Look, Sian's actually, I'd forgotten our expert is actually online with us, and she's put, my understanding is that they are only available to organisations with more than 50 employees and for employees who cannot work from home, but we'll find out more details. So Donna, we've got partly an answer for you, but we will come back to you later, and if appropriate, we'll carry on that at our next clinic. Okay, so no more questions have come through the chat. So thank you again, Barry, and thank you, Ian. And I'll hand back over to Caroline to close our clinic for February. And thank you for everybody who's come online, particularly around half term. Caroline, you're muted. Thank you.
I know most of the staff would prefer I was always muted. Next slide, please, Jill.
That's it.
Our last one. Okay, so last one. We haven't got a goodbye one. Thank you ever so much, everybody, for listening this morning. Hopefully, we're still informing you all and keeping you all up to date. Keep the questions coming. Keep joining the clinics. We hope you're all well and you're all fighting fit. And for those of you who are homeschooling, I hope you have a well-deserved week off this week with half term in England. And obviously for people who are in the other countries, if you're not in half term when you are, I hope you get a well-deserved break. Ian, thank you very much. Barry, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us. And we wish you all the best, and we are moving the sector forward in terms of getting people more active. I think the message getting across. Certainly when I joined Leisure 30 odd years ago, it wasn't a priority, and I think that it is much more of a priority now, and everybody knows that. And certainly Sport England and you guys have helped drive that, as well as I think we have helped in Quest as well. So we're getting there. Thank you ever so much, everybody, and have a lovely couple of weeks. Hopefully the lockdown comes to a close soon. The sun starts shining and the temperatures rise a bit more, and we can get out and about a bit more. So thank you ever so much for listening, everybody. Take care.